The Battle of Verneuil was a battle of the Hundred Years' War fought on the 17th of August, 1424, near Verneuil in Normandy. In 1424, France was still recovering from the 1415 disaster at Agincourt. Following King Henry V's conquest of Normandy, the northern provinces were now in the hands of the English. After the death of Henry V in August 1422, the continuing English war effort was managed by John, Duke of Bedford, leading instead for the 9-month-old Henry VI. France at this time was divided between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians. The French Dauphin, despite his disinheritance by the Treaty of Troyes, was eager to retake French territories and, ultimately, crown himself king. After the massacre of the French knights at Agincourt, the French Dauphin was in desperate need of soldiers, and so he looked to Scotland, France's old ally, against England. In the autumn of 1419, some 6,000 Scottish troops landed in France under the command of John Stuart, Earl of Buchan. The Scottish presence gave moderate success, with the French scoring victories at Baugé in 1421 and Le Brassinière in 1423. These French victories now convinced the French that it was possible to destroy a large English army in a decisive field battle. And so a plan was made. The main English army would be sought out and crushed, and then Charles VII could be crowned king in Reims. In 1424, the English army under the command of John, Duke of Bedford, and the experienced Thomas Montagu, Earl of Salisbury, marched against the French fortress of Ivry, about 50 kilometers northeast of Verneuil. In August, the Franco-Scottish army made ready and marched to relieve the fortress. Scottish forces were led by Archibald Douglas, 4th Earl of Douglas, and John Stuart, Earl of Buchan. They left Tours on the 4th of August to link up with the French commanders, John VIII of Harcourt, Count of Aumale, and William II, the Viscount of Narbonne. But before the army could arrive, Ivry surrendered to the English. Uncertain what to do next, the Allied commanders held a council of war. The Scots and some of the younger French officers were eager for battle, but Narbonne and the senior French nobility had not forgotten Agincourt. Some were even veterans of the Battle of Agincourt, and they were reluctant. As a compromise, it was agreed to attack the English strongholds on the Norman border, beginning with Verneuil in the west. The town of Verneuil was then subsequently captured by a group of Scots who opened the gates by pretending to be English. On the 15th of August, Bedford received news that Verneuil was in French hands, and so he made haste and rode there as quickly as he could. The allied Franco-Scottish army deployed a mile north of Verneuil, on an open plain by the road leading out of the forest of Pizou. The flat fields had been chosen to give the greatest advantage to their cavalry, whereby they could be employed to their full potential against the enemy archers. Joining the French army was a force of 2,000 heavy cavalry from the Duchy of Milan, clad in complete suits of tempered steel plate armor. The Milanese troops were hired from Filippo Maria Visconti, the Duke of Milan, after an alliance was made on the 17th of February. The mounted Milanese men-at-arms were placed in front of the dismounted Franco-Scottish men-at-arms, who were formed into one battle. The Count of Aumale and the Viscount of Narbonne, with the Spanish mercenary men-at-arms, along with most of the French, were positioned on the left of the road, while the Scottish forces, led by Douglas and Buchan, were positioned on the right. Overall, the total army strength of the French army was estimated to be from 14,000 to 16,000 men. Emerging from the forest, the English army, led by Bedford, likewise had their men arranged in a single battle to match the enemy. with the usual arrangement of knights and men-at-arms located in the center, with the archers located on the flanks, with anti-cavalry sharpened stakes in front of them. The English army was estimated to be around 9,000 men, with the Duke of Bedford located to the left of the road, and the Earl of Salisbury and his men on the right. A lightly armored force of 500 to 2,000 men, some mounted, was placed in the rear and put in charge of guarding the baggage train. Both sides were initially hesitant to make the first move, and so, for most of the day, the two armies stood facing each other in a tense standoff. At some point, Bedford sent a herald to Douglas, once both armies had been deployed, to ask what terms for battle he required, to which Douglas replied that the Scots would neither give nor receive any quarter. At about 4 p.m., Bedford ordered his men to advance. A short archery duel began between English and Scottish archers. The result of this archery duel was inconclusive. Now, the 2,000 Milanese mounted men-at-arms sounded the charge, smashing into the English front line. Aside the English wooden stakes that could not be secured in the earth as the ground was too hard. The English arrows proved mostly ineffective against the Italian mercenaries' superior armor. The shock effect of the Milanese charge terrified the English, with men-at-arms and archers knocked over and gaps torn in the English ranks as they tried to avoid the onslaught. The Milanese rode through the entire English formation, dispersing the longbowmen on their English right. The Milanese went on to attack the English baggage train, triggering a rout. The rear guard of 500 to 2,000 English men ran away, some fleeing on horseback, and the Milanese gave chase. After the devastating cavalry charge, the Duke of Bedford rallied his men. The English men-at-arms showed great discipline and reformed their ranks. Sensing a victory was near, the French men-at-arms led a ferocious charge, with Narbonne's men reaching the English before the rest. The French infantry charge was somewhat disorderly as a result of, in part, the desire to close in fast to avoid English arrows. As the French advanced under Ambelais, they shouted, "Montjoie, Saint-Denis!" Bedford's men-at-arms rose and met their French opponents, and the men under Thomas Montagu, Earl of Salisbury, were hard pressed by the Scots. For about an hour, French and English forces engaged in a head-on clash of bloody hand-to-hand combat on the field of Verneuil, without either side gaining any advantage in what is often considered to be one of the most fiercely fought battles of the war. Bedford himself fought in the battle, wielding a fearsome two-handed pole axe. The English longbowmen on the right, previously dispersed by the Milanese charge, had by now reformed, and they, along with the longbowmen on the left, joined the main struggle with a great shout that boosted the morale of the English men-at-arms, who began a devastating attack on the French. After some time, the French battle line gave ground before finally breaking. They were chased back to Verneuil, where many, including Aumale and Narbonne, were killed. Now having defeated the French, Bedford called a halt to the pursuit and returned to the battlefield, where Salisbury was engaged with the Scots, now standing alone. Finally, Bedford wheeled from the south to take the Scots on the right flank, now almost surrounded and abandoned by their allies. The Scots made a ferocious last stand, but they were overwhelmed. The English took no quarter and massacred the Scotsmen. Despite some surrendering, even they were slain. This was done to avenge the death of the Duke of Clarence, brother of Henry V, and the Duke of Bedford, who died at the Battle of Verneuil in 1421. Almost the entire Scottish force died on the battlefield, including the leaders of the Scottish army, Archibald Douglas, 4th Earl of Douglas, and John Stewart, the Earl of Buchan. The Milanese cavalry returned to the battle only to discover their comrades were dead, and they too turned and fled after. Altogether, some 6,000 to 8,000 men on the French Allied side were slain, and 200 captured. The English, on the other hand, lost around 1,600. The battle was over, and it was a major English victory. In the aftermath of the battle, the English captured all border posts of Lancaster and Normandy. Bedford returned in triumph to Paris, where he, quote, was received as if he had been God, close quote. Dauphin Charles was forced to postpone his plans of coronation at Reims. In the aftermath of Verneuil, the road appeared to lie open to take Bourges, and thus bring all of France under English control. The Battle of Verneuil was one of the bloodiest battles of the 100 Years' War, described by the English as a second Agincourt. It was a huge blow to French morale, as for the second time in a decade, the pride of French knighthood had met the English bowmen in battle, and had been humiliatingly defeated. After Verneuil, the English were able to consolidate their position in Normandy, temporarily securing the conquests of the deceased King Henry V. Ultimately, the victory helped the English retain control over Normandy for another 3 decades.